Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. Forsaken Realms Vahrin's Call is coming out on July 27th on Steam after more than 5 years of development.
I'm so very sorry. I know my ramblings mean little to you.
I started covering this game way back in 2021 and did various videos about it, and now I finally got to play it for myself. The studio behind the game was kind enough to send me a review key almost 10 days before the embargo lifts, which is extremely appreciated. So I had more than enough time to play the game at my own pace and make a review about it.
Just the job for a friendly new face such as yours.
Vahrin's Call is a third-person, story-driven action RPG inspired by Fable and the Elder Scrolls games. It's not a huge RPG by any means, and it should take around 20 to 30 hours to complete it, depending on how you play. I finished the main story after about 20 hours, but I still have a lot of side content unfinished, and I'm guessing I could easily get at least 10 more hours from this playthrough. You can continue playing the game after you finish all 10 chapters of the main story, which is useful to know if you plan to check this game out. So let's start talking about all major features of Vahrin's Call, starting with the visuals. They were not kidding when they said the game is inspired by Fable. Vahrin's Call is an indie RPG by a small studio, so don't expect some crazy fidelity and amazing graphics in general. But as always, I think the artistic style is way more important than the sheer graphical fidelity, and this game is a great example of that. It's a very vibrant and colorful RPG, but it's also one of those RPGs which are not afraid to be dark. Dungeons and some indoor areas can get really dark, so you have to use your lantern, which reminds me a little bit about the game called Outward. Come to think of it, I started covering Vahrin's Call back in 2021 when I was looking for similar games to Outward. But that's pretty much where all the similarities with these two games ends. Anyway, all of the maps you get to explore in this high fantasy RPG were pleasant to look at because of the visuals. You can argue that the game looks pretty outdated, and I wouldn't disagree at all, but that doesn't matter a lot to me personally. They definitely managed to create some great vibes with these graphics and the atmosphere in general. If you enjoy colorful RPGs and vibrant high fantasy worlds, I think you'll like the look of this game quite a bit. The weakest part of the visuals is definitely the character models, or faces to be more precise. Armor design is actually top-notch, and I love discovering new set pieces while I progress through the game. But faces on characters look pretty bad for this day and age. Again, I don't really care that much, but I know some people will. On the bright side, all important characters have unique looking faces, and they are easily recognizable. And you have a decent character customization system which allows you to change the look of your character. There are more than enough sliders to mess around with, but I think the game needs more hair options for male characters. I hated all of the options for hair, so I ended up playing as a bald dude with a beard. As for the performance, I had little to no issues with this game while playing on 2K resolution with high settings plus upscaling on quality. You can check out my PC specs on the screen somewhere. I only had a few frame drops here and there, which is not even worth mentioning. The game felt really polished for me actually, and you can tell it's been in development for a long time. Now let's talk about the story.
To even speak ill of the Queen is blasphemous. What we now discuss could very well be treason.
Vahrin's Call is set in a high fantasy world called Leda. The city of Vahrin has been attacked by monsters, and the factions that were protecting the city got almost completely destroyed. One of the factions that defended the city is called the Snatchers, but they ended up becoming traitors and bandits. The Snatchers are the most common enemy type you'll fight in the first 10 hours of the game or so. You will meet a handful of important characters for the main story, and you'll see these people quite often when you progress through the chapters. But to be completely honest, none of these characters is even remotely interesting, and the same thing can be said about the story.
Most of the fools that barred our path are dead. Nonetheless, Caravan escaped us, and now has the Snatchers guarding the city gates.
The main story ends up feeling very shallow, predictable and boring, with little to no lore to be found. I made a small mistake in my preview video about this game, which I posted a couple of days ago. I said in that video that there are dialogue options for the player character, but that's not true at all. The main story in Vahrin's Call is actually completely linear. All of the important dialogue scenes and those little cutscenes for the main story are automatic. You don't get any dialogue options or any choices to make, which was definitely a bit disappointing.
I would not lie to you.
I expected at least some optional dialogue that you can select, so you can learn more about the lore and the story. I wouldn't mind the linear path they chose for the story if the story was actually very interesting. Unfortunately, it's not.
Forgive my rambling. I fear I am in need of a strong drink.
The story in this game just feels like a vehicle that pushes the game forward and something that tries to justify the gameplay. I really feel like a jackass when I talk like this about indie RPGs, but it's just the truth. Vahrin's Call ends up feeling like an action-adventure game because of this, even though it has plenty of RPG features within its gameplay. So if you're hoping to experience some great RPG storytelling, I have to disappoint you. It's some very basic and generic stuff when it comes to the story and setting. I think even this studio is aware of this and they decided to focus a lot more on the gameplay. I enjoyed playing this game a lot because the gameplay is actually really fun, so let's talk about that. First of all, the control scheme in this game is pretty good. Moving your character around, jumping, fighting, and pretty much all other actions feel responsive and snappy. It's worth mentioning that I played with my Xbox controller from the beginning to the very end. The game has a little tutorial segment in the beginning which will teach you about some basic stuff. It was pretty decent, although I wasn't a huge fan of quote-unquote yellow paint or white paint in this particular case. There is some yellow paint as well in the game, mostly for some hidden stuff you can find. I felt like this was completely unnecessary in this game, because it's not exactly like an open world RPG where you can easily get lost. Even if it was, I would just prefer a more subtle player guidance instead of this silly paint that looks out of place. Anyway, you're going to do a lot of fighting in this game, so let's talk about that. Vahrin's Call gives you 2 slots for weapons and a lot of quick slots for casting spells and using potions. There are one-handed weapons and shields, two-handed weapons such as greatswords, great axe, and hammers. You can dual wield 2 one-handed weapons, and you have bows. It's all up to you how you want to customize those 2 weapon slots. You can mix and match whatever you like. I played through the entire game with 2-handed swords, a bow, and some specific spells. I focused on a couple of frost spells for slowing enemies down and fire buff for my weapons. My bow skill was maxed out as well, giving me the ability to use various elemental arrows. In case you didn't notice, Vahrin's Call features a completely classless RPG gameplay. You can use whatever you want, and the more you use something, the more your skill progresses. It's very similar to Elder Scrolls games, but more about the progression system in a minute. Some of your melee attacks will consume stamina, as well as your dodges and blocks. Your dodge rolls are also affected by the armor you wear, similar to Souls-like games. You can choose to be lighter and have a bigger dodge, but even the small one works pretty good because of the iframes. Your basic attacks don't consume any stamina, but your special and strong attacks do. Those special abilities with weapons deal some great damage at the cost of stamina and speed in my particular case. You can choose a much faster melee playstyle with dual wielding 2 one-handed weapons and get special skills and abilities for that playstyle if that's what you prefer. I don't think the stamina system in this game is really aggressive or that similar to Souls-like games. Fighting bosses comes closer to that experience for sure, but mostly because of their mechanics that you have to worry about. And there is a pretty good amount of boss fights in the game. It also depends on what kind of a build you're going for and which items you have equipped. You cannot improve your stats like health, mana or stamina while leveling up, but you can get skills related to those stats which will boost them. A lot of the skills you get will improve those stats, as well as the playstyle you're going for. Melee combat feels good and it's decently impactful, even though the sound effects for hits are far from being amazing.
I stab you in the face!
Some combat sound effects are much better than others though. Special abilities with weapons sound pretty good and impactful. I just think the basic sound effects for melee weapons need to be beefier. That being said, the combat as a whole package feels pretty good. One of the reasons why the combat reminds me of Oblivion a little bit is because of how you select and cast spells. You can only select one spell and then cast it with a single button. Then you always have to switch between them by using this hotbar and then cast them with the left button on the controller. This works fine, but it's very annoying when you want to heal with a potion because you have to use the same methods. I would much more prefer to have a dedicated button for healing or making the potions into a completely separate section. God knows how many times I died because I was trying to switch to a potion or a healing spell in the heat of action. It makes the process of healing a lot slower than it should be. Yeah, skill issue. Speaking of which, I played on the second hardest difficulty. I think the game has a very decent amount of challenge, especially in boss fights, but even just in general. Although I think this difficulty in particular should be at least a bit harder in early and in the mid game, but the late game is completely fine. The gameplay with the bow is very satisfying, especially because of the timed shots you can do from the very beginning of the game. If you time your shots well, you'll do a lot more damage. There is a sound effect for this, which is really satisfying. And if you increase your bow skills by simply using the bow in combat, you unlock some cool elemental arrows, which pack quite a punch. If you want to go deeper into this playstyle, you can also get trap abilities. I didn't care that much for this because I don't like traps in general, but it seems like a pretty cool addition to range gameplay, especially if you want to be a pure ranger. That's definitely possible in this game, by the way, but I like to mix it up. Vahrin's Call streamlined some mechanics like the bows, for example, because you don't have to buy arrows. You have unlimited basic arrows, but those elemental arrows I mentioned before are limited. However, they just work on a cooldown and they will regenerate pretty fast. Same goes for health potions. So pretty much all playstyles in this game are fun to play. Whether you want to use melee, range, magic or the combination of three, I think there is a high chance that you'll have fun with this combat system. The combat mechanics are pretty decent in general, but the progression system is also a huge reason why it's enjoyable. It's pretty fun to level up your skills and get more spells and abilities to try them out, but first you'll need to find the skill books in the open world. And you also need to increase your skill level with your desired weapon type before you can activate those skills if you found the book. This progression system is not exactly linear. You can and you will miss some books, and sometimes you will find a skill book that's much deeper in the skill tree. All the skills are capped at level 16 and the max character level is level 80. I don't like random progression in RPGs that much, but since Vahrin's Call is not a huge open world, which would make the randomized progression way more annoying, it's not a huge deal. You will explore most of these areas anyway and find the majority of the books. It's a little bit confusing sometimes because it seems like you randomly unlock some new abilities. For melee weapons you'll get more abilities which need to be triggered with a special button combination. I used a couple of them for my greatsword all the time. The way you improve your spells is a little bit different. You need to visit a certain NPC in the hamlet and use the table for improving spells, but first you need some materials. Same goes for weapons and armor, just across the street with the blacksmiths. Even though combat is pretty enjoyable from the beginning to the very end, the game suffers a little bit from the lack of enemy variety. It's not a huge problem, especially considering the total playtime of the game. It would be much worse if the game was a very long RPG. But for the first 10 hours or so, you're just fighting a bunch of bandit-like NPCs, basically, and some small enemies like wolves and other critters, until you get to the next boss fights. Speaking of which, the boss variety is pretty damn good. All big bosses have completely unique mechanics and attack patterns that you have to learn. Even some early bosses in the game were pretty fun to fight. It's not like the game doesn't have cool enemies to fight outside of boss encounters, but some of those NPCs feel underused. For example, these mages from the academy or some strong knights that only appear later in the game. I know it should make sense who you fight and when, depending on the progression and the story, but I wish they used these enemies a bit more in the game. They did a good job with the harder difficulty from the late mid-game to the very end. Boss fights from the early and close to the mid-game could be a bit harder, they felt a bit undertuned, at least for the build I was going for. It was around chapter 6 when the game got noticeably more challenging, especially in boss fights, but even just in general. so I really enjoyed the challenge after that. You're pretty much forced to upgrade your gear in order to keep up with the game, on this difficulty at least. Once again, I have to give them some huge props for these boss fights. Even though they can make the game feel more like a Souls-like rather than a traditional story-driven RPG, but still, I enjoyed them quite a bit. They all have this little cutscene before every fight, which is really basic, but it's really appreciated. If they had at least a few voice lines before these fights or during the cutscene, it will probably improve the main story a little bit, but it is what it is.
Blasphemous!
Speaking of Souls-like mechanics, I don't like how enemies respawn in this game. When you die, you will respawn at the last shrine you activated, which is similar to Diablo-like ARPGs or even Souls-likes. Whenever this happens, all enemies that you just cleared in that zone instantly respawn, which is not fun at all if you ask me. It's actually pretty annoying, especially in later chapters when you're fighting much stronger enemies. And make no mistake, you will die in this game quite a bit. This is not a problem against bosses, because you respawn right outside of the fighting arena. Again, just like in Souls-like games. But other than that, it's just annoying going through the same enemies once again, especially in later chapters. The only reason I could think of that could justify this is the progression, or how it works. Without enemies to fight, you won't be able to increase your skills. But I'm pretty sure you could do this easily, even without enemies that respawn. I'm cool with some enemies that could respawn, but certainly not all of them. It just feels like a chore to do everything from the beginning. From the beginning of the level, I mean. Overall, I think the combat in this game was really enjoyable, as well as the progression. I will continue playing my character and complete all of the side content because I really want to play some more and explore everything. Speaking of exploring everything, let's talk about the level design. Vahrin's Call has a lot of instance zones separated by a loading screen. There are a few areas which are bigger and more open, but most of them are smaller instance levels. However, even the smaller levels are not exactly linear. Pretty much all zones, bigger or smaller, have some interesting optional paths to take and secrets to find. Mostly in terms of the new loot you can pick up or some side quests that will reward you with a unique item or an ability. I think the level design in this game is pretty good in general. These areas are not too big or not too small, it's just perfect. It's not an open world game, but the levels are quite open, if that makes sense. A lot of these closed areas have multiple levels that you can explore, shortcuts to find and doors to open. It would be very boring if these levels were very linear and straightforward, but they are not. I mean, you can make every RPG linear if you want to, by just trying to rush through the main story. Wandering off a beaten path will always lead to some extra loot and more enemies to fight in this game. And like I said, exploring is always rewarding. Discovering these big chests usually guarantee you that you'll pick up something that you don't have already. Enemies also have a chance to drop some of their armor or a weapon, and I'm not sure if this is random. Whatever the case might be, it seems like a very small chance for this to happen, but it will happen. Every single map will show you the amount of chests you can find, skill books and gnomes. Yeah, these little bastards are all over the place, and they have the most annoying laugh ever. It starts off as a very fun side quest, and it's like a little mini game that lasts until the very end of the game. You can hear them laugh way before you can see them, which begins a small side activity to find and destroy them. A completely optional side activity which can be fun or annoying at the same time, and I love it and hate it at the same time. And I kinda think that was the entire point of it. Side content in this game is usually very straightforward and simple, like pretty much everything else. But there are some memorable and fun side quests which try to do something unique. Come to think of it, I found these side quests way more interesting than the main quest in general, especially from the narrative side of things. There is a decent amount of platforming in the game, but nothing too crazy. You can sprint and jump in this game, which you're going to use quite a bit. You can only jump on some predetermined terrain, and once again, you'll know when this is the case because of the paint. The jumping ability feels good by itself, but it can also be really annoying because there is no ledge grabbing mechanic, except those predetermined platforms. This can make the movement very annoying sometimes, because even some very small obstacles can be a big problem for you when you're jumping. A simple mechanic that will make it easier to jump over small obstacles on the map would make the exploration much smoother. This is not a problem in areas with actual platforming, those areas work just fine. You usually just have to jump over something and just watch your step. Platforming areas in the late game get a bit more challenging with traps that can kill you, but even those are easily manageable. Like I said, I love the level design in general, and the light platforming was also enjoyable, despite my problem with the jumping. Overall, I had a lot of fun with Vahrin's Call, and I'm glad it finally got released after so many years.
I know my ramblings mean little to you.
Even though I didn't like how linear the story is, or the story in general, I really enjoyed the gameplay, and I can see myself playing the game a lot more and finishing all the side contents. The replay value doesn't seem that strong from the story perspective at least, but it could be fun to try out different combinations and playstyles. And that would conclude my review for Vahrin's Call.
Just the job for a friendly new face such as yours.
Tell me your opinion about this game in the comments below, and will you decide to check it out or not? It's $35 on Steam, which seems like a fair price. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to go a step further, consider supporting your boy by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon. Huge thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see ya in the next one.